So in 1775, not too far from this spot, we call the Cradle of Liberty, Paul Revere started on his ride to alert Massachusetts revolutionaries of an invasion coming from the sea. In 2012, Sandy was our warning that climate change could bring an invasion here in Massachusetts from the sea itself. Climate scientists and activists are modern-day Paul Revere's, sounding the alarm about climate change. In the wake of Sandy, now those of us on the East Coast hear the alarm loud and clear. Superstorm Sandy was an unprecedented storm, and it should be no surprise. In 2011, Americans endured 14 extreme weather disasters that each cost $1 billion or more. 2012 started with early and severe tornadoes, fueled in part by the warm water of the Gulf of Mexico. That same warm water led to the formation of 2 tropical depressions in May, even before hurricane season started. Hurricane Isaac curtailed the Republican convention in September. And at the very end of the hurricane season, Sandy left her scar on the East Coast. Lives were lost, homes destroyed, families struggled to stay warm without power for weeks. Some were without power. Superstorm Sandy was supercharged and steered by climate change in 3 different ways. First, it is hotter. This year is on track to be the hottest on record for the continental United States. Climate change is heating up the oceans, including the Atlantic off of the East Coast, where ocean temperature readings earlier this year were the hottest they have ever been in a record that stretches back to 1854. That warmer water fuels stronger storms. Second, it is higher. That heat is melting glaciers and expanding the water in the oceans and raising sea levels. And it's happening faster here along the eastern seaboard, where sea level has risen up to 4 times faster than other parts of the globe. When you combine a stronger storm with high tides and sea level rise, you get devastation like we have now just seen with Sandy. And third, it is more harmful. The seas are hotter. The sea levels are higher. The storms are stronger. And because of the dramatic changes in the Arctic, including disappearance of sea ice, scientists think this melting could be affecting the jet stream. That can turn what used to be a harmless storm steered out to sea into a direct hit on the east coast of the United States. And we all watched in horror as Sandy hit New Jersey and New York. Picture 1, Manhattan. Sandy cut power to 7.9 million people. Picture 2, Breezy Point, Queens. Rows of burnt houses and fires caused by Sandy's wrath. Over 50 homes in Queens were destroyed and hundreds were damaged. Picture 3, New York City subway. The New York City subway system was shut down. 5 million people used the New York City subway system per day. 7 tunnels, including the East River, flooded. Under the East River flooded. It was the worst disaster in the 108-year history of the New York City subway system. Picture 4, Tuckerton, New Jersey. The storm surge blasted that small town, whose population is just 3,000 people. It destroyed 8 homes and delivered massive damage to another 300. Picture 5, Lower Manhattan, the financial district. Cars were swept up by surging water, washed into a basement garage in the financial district. Picture 6, Sandy from space, a satellite image of the massive Sandy from outer space, covering an area unprecedented in 3 weeks after the storm struck, thousands were still without power. 18,000 in Long Island, 2,000 in New York City, 14,000 in New Jersey. So we are left to ask ourselves, what if Sandy had hit Boston? To begin with, we will hear in a moment from Dr. Paul Kirschen, who has looked at the cost of coastal flooding and climate change. The baseline cost numbers for a single event in that study, $6 billion, serves as a rough estimate of the cost of serious storm hitting the Boston metropolitan area. Dr. Kirshen's work shows coastal flooding because of climate change could cost the Boston metropolitan area approximately $94 billion, with the multiple events occurring over the course of this century. Superstorm Sandy has put into stark relief that we are particularly vulnerable here in Massachusetts and New England to the effects of climate change. Our summers are getting hotter. By the end of the century, climate change could make summer in Massachusetts feel like summer in North Carolina, raising the average temperature from 73 degrees to 86 degrees by the end of this century. Our winters are warming, turning the poetry of Robert Frost into oral history of winters past. According to scientists at the University of New Hampshire, New England winters have become 4 degrees Fahrenheit warmer on average since 1965. Say that again. Our winters in New England have become 4 degrees warmer Fahrenheit since 1965. We now have Philadelphia's weather from 1965, but without their sports teams. Thank goodness. Our seas are heating up. The average sea surface temperature in the Northeast for the first half of 2012 was the highest since record keeping began in 1854. It was 51 degrees Fahrenheit in 2012, more than 3 degrees higher than the average for the last 3 decades. This isn't just about putting the polar bear swim in Southie at risk. This is about weather that feels like the Deep South, changing the very face of our state before our eyes. These warmer, rising seas are eating away at our coastline. Massachusetts loses an average of 2.8 million square feet to rising sea levels each year, especially in places like Cape Cod. And even though Cape Cod may not disappear tomorrow, it's getting increasingly hard to find actual cod, the sacred symbol of Massachusetts. Cod love cold water. And the waters off of our shores are just not as cold. By late this century, Georges Bank is projected to be too warm to attract cod. Meanwhile, lobsters are flourishing, which sounds like a delicious problem, except for the lobstermen who are losing their shirts from depressed lobster prices. But we don't need projections to tell us what could happen. Because if Sandy had hit Boston at high tide, another 5 feet of water would have surged into Boston and along our coastline. And sea level rise from climate change could add another 2.5 feet by the latter part of this century. So how would Boston's landmarks fare if Sandy hit at high tide today and in 50 years or so with an additional 2.5 feet of sea level rise? Well, picture one, Sandy at high tide, 0 to 2 feet higher. Sandy in the future, 2 to 4 feet higher. Picture two, Faneuil Hall. Sandy at high tide, 2 feet higher. Sandy in the future, 2 to 4 feet higher. Picture three, at Logan Airport. Sandy in the future will be up to 4 feet higher. Picture four, Boston Garden. Sandy in the future will be 2 to 4 feet higher in terms of the water. In the Boston Common, the public garden, Sandy in the future will be 2 to 4 feet higher. And picture six, neighborhoods of the Back Bay, Sandy in the future, the tides would be 2 to 4 feet higher. But instead of taking these threats seriously, the debate in Washington amongst the Republicans turned climate change into a punchline at their national convention and clean energy into a punching bag in the Congress and on the campaign trail. While Americans are worried about Mother Nature's wrath, too many Republican leaders appear more worried about the wrath of the Koch brothers and other big oil banners. So what we saw in the final week of that campaign was a battle, a referendum between Mother Nature and the Koch brothers. And the American public voted for Mother Nature because they could see what was happening to this planet. We know that burning more oil, coal, and fossil fuels is what causes global warming, yet Republican leaders in Washington want to preserve $4 billion in annual tax breaks for the most profitable oil companies in the world. They want to raise taxes on wind energy production, even though it emits zero carbon pollution. They also want to scrap the fuel economy standards that increase the fuel economy of the vehicles which we drive up to 54.5 miles per gallon by the year 2026, that simultaneously backs out 3 million barrels of oil a day that we would not have to import from the Middle East, while reducing dramatically the equivalent of 1 full year's worth of all of the CO2 which the United States sends up into the atmosphere. So they deny the science, they delay on solutions, but what's happening is Americans are already paying an extreme weather tax in the price of their food, in the cost of the damage which has been caused across this country. There was $60 billion worth of extreme weather damages in 2011 that taxpayers, homeowners, business owners had to pay. This year we had the worst months of drought since the Dust Bowl. The repercussions are still rippling through the economy and could end up costing an estimated $50 billion in damages. Wildfires, nearly $8 billion in damages. Hurricane Isaac, which delayed the Republican convention, cost $1.5 billion. But this isn't just about how climate change is taxing our economy. This is about the human toll which it exacts. Sandy caused 179 deaths, including 110 Americans. It shut down large parts of New Jersey and the city of New York. And that is just the most extreme weather disaster. This year's drought destroyed farmers' crops, ranchers' livestock, driving prices up at the grocery store for Americans already struggling to get by. Wildfires torched thousands of homes in several western states. So, George already talked about this. We had not increased the fuel economy standards of the vehicles we drive all the way from 1975 until the year 2007. And each year on the House floor, each Congress, I would make an amendment to increase the fuel economy standards. And each year I would lose by ever narrower margins until 2007 when the Democrats took over the House and the Senate. And in 2007, we were successful in increasing the fuel economy standards to give the President the power to increase those fuel economy standards. And in conjunction with Massachusetts versus EPA, the Supreme Court decision, a 5-4 decision in April of 2007, the President was able to do so to raise those fuel economy standards to 54.7. Now, that is... the television ads now, every ad now says, we get 33 miles per gallon. The next ad says, no, we get 37 miles per gallon. The next side says, no, we get 39 miles per gallon. And guess what? That's what people want, right? So now the auto industry market for what it is that the public has been thirsting for all along. Similarly, this president is now talking about putting on the books regulations that will ensure that not only new coal-fired plants, but old coal-fired plants have to reduce dramatically the amount of CO2 that are emitted from coal-fired plants in our country. And that's the greatest single source of this pollution going up into the atmosphere. So we have a tremendous set of opportunities which we can capture. We are now up to 391 parts per million of CO2 up into the atmosphere. When Paul Revere began his ride, we were at 280 parts per million of CO2 up in the atmosphere. So this change has occurred in a way in which the United States has been the principal historic contributor. As other countries look at us, they look up in the sky and they see red, white, and blue CO2. And the Chinese and the Indians, they say to us, do not preach temperance from a bar stool. You have to be the leader. You have to put in place policy. Now here's the good news. Since 2005, with the new fuel economy standards, with the reductions in the switching over already from coal over to natural gas, with the incredible increase in the amount of wind and solar, I'm going to give you a couple of big numbers that are great numbers. This year, 12,000 new megawatts of wind will be installed in the United States of America. 12,000 new megawatts. Seabrook is 1,000 megawatts. 12,000 new megawatts this year. 3,000 new megawatts of solar installed this year in the United States. That's 15,000 new megawatts of wind and solar installed this year. So we have to make sure that those tax breaks stay on the books, that we continue to have the kinds of incentives that are going to be needed in order to put in place the ability for the United States to be the leader in convincing the rest of the world to change their behavior in order to save the planet against the worst consequences of climate change. The planet is running afield. There are no emergency rooms for planets. We have to engage in the kinds of preventative care that reduce the likelihood that we ever do see those worst consequences. That's our opportunity. That's our challenge. That is why we are here today. Now, there are many people who do not believe that we can do this. They don't believe that we can put a clean energy standard on the books in the United States Congress. They don't believe that we can increase the fuel economy standards to 54.5 miles per gallon. They don't believe that we can switch over from coal over to other sources of the generation of electricity. And they don't believe that we can export these technologies around the planet. Well, in 1961, President Kennedy addressed the Congress. And he challenged the Congress to be bold. And what he said was that we have to put a man on the moon. And we have to do so before the end of that decade. That we would have to invent metals that had never before existed. That we would have to return this ship from the moon at speeds that had never before been achieved. That we would have to do so in temperatures half of the heat of the sun, and we would have to do it safely. Now, over the head of the Speaker of the House, the President, as he addresses the Congress on the State of the Union, is an American flag. And that American flag is the flag that flew on the moon, because America accepted the challenge to be bold. And that's what we have to do on this issue of climate change. We have to ensure that, like the many who came to this hall over the years, the suffragettes who said that they were going to change the laws so that women could vote. The abolitionist movement, as George said, who said, we're going to change the Constitution so that slavery is abolished. Those that opposed the war in Vietnam came here to say that they were going to give the leadership to change our relationship with Southeast Asia. All of it happened here. All of it happened as part of this revolutionary spirit that animated this city back in 1775 and 1776.